The 20th of November, 1839. The mission ship Camden dropped anchor off the coast of Erromango. To the crew, it looked like paradise. But the map should have been marked with a skull. Two men, John Williams and James Harris, stepped onto the sand to greet the locals. They walked forward with open hands. They didn't even make it past the tree line. There was no conversation, no warning. Within minutes, the war clubs swung. Both men were bludgeoned to death before the crew on the ship could even load a musket. The crew watched helplessly from the deck. They didn't bury the bodies. They dragged them into the bush. Within the hour, smoke began to rise. It wasn't a reception. It was a menu. The world learned a lesson that day. The New Hebrides is a graveyard. If you go, you don't come back. But 19 years later, a young Scotsman named John G. Paton looked at that graveyard and bought a one-way ticket. When Paton announced he was going to the New Hebrides, nobody clapped. His friends didn't call him brave. They called him insane. They told him he was throwing his life away for people who would kill him on sight. One elder, Mr. Dixon, exploded in anger. He screamed at Paton, "The cannibals! You will be eaten by cannibals!" It wasn't a warning. It was a guarantee. Paton looked the old man in the eye and delivered one of the coldest lines in history. "Mr. Dixon, you are advanced in years, and your own prospect is soon to be eaten by worms. If I can live and die serving the Lord Jesus, it makes no difference to me whether I am eaten by cannibals or by worms." He won the argument, but the reality was terrifying. When he arrived on the island of Tanna, the ground shook. The volcano, Mount Yasur, was erupting day and night. The air smelled of sulfur and death. He was prepared to die violently. He had accepted that. But he wasn't prepared for the silence. He wasn't prepared to be the only light in a world of total darkness. It didn't take spears to break him. It took the jungle itself. Just 3 months after arriving, a tropical fever swept through the mission house. It came fast, and it had no mercy. In March, his young wife Mary died. A few days later, his newborn son followed her. In less than a week, John Paton went from a husband and father to a man standing entirely alone at the edge of the world. He begged the locals for help to bury them. They refused. They just watched. So, John Paton had to carry the bodies out into the storm himself. He had to dig the hole. He had to cover the faces of the only people he loved with dirt. He later wrote, "But for Jesus, I would have gone mad and died beside that lonely grave." He had lost everything. He was exhausted, sick, and broken, but he couldn't afford to grieve. Because the tribe watching from the bushes didn't see a tragedy. They saw an opportunity. To them, those fresh graves weren't a resting place. They were a pantry. On Tanna, the tribe believed that eating the flesh of a powerful man gave you his power. And to them, the white man was powerful. They didn't care if the bodies were dead. They wanted the manna, the spiritual power, in the bones. Paton realized he couldn't leave them. If he slept inside, he would wake up to an empty grave. So he did something unimaginable. He moved his bed. He took his blanket, his Bible, and his musket, and sat directly on top of the dirt mound. For 53 nights, he didn't really sleep. He sat there in the dark, listening. Every time a twig snapped, he raised his gun. Every time the leaves rustled, he saw the shadows of men moving in the tree line, waiting for him to nod off. Imagine the psychological torture. Alone, grieving, surrounded by people who want to eat your family. Most men would have gone mad. Paton later said he felt the physical presence of Jesus sitting on the grave next to him, keeping him sane. He survived the nights. The warriors eventually backed off. But as the sun rose on the 54th day, a new enemy arrived. The rain stopped. The clouds vanished. The island began to die of thirst. The drought was the final straw. Crops died. The streams turned to dust. The chiefs gathered around Paton, their weapons drawn. They told him, "Your God has cursed us. If it does not rain, you die." Paton made a desperate gamble. He told them, "My God can give you water from the ground." The chief laughed in his face. To them, water came from the sky. To dig for it in solid coral rock was the act of a lunatic. He started to dig. Hour after hour, day after day. The heat was 110 degrees. He had no engineering tools, just a pickaxe and desperation. He was digging his way to the center of the earth. The warriors gathered around the rim of the hole to watch the show. They mocked him. They told him he was digging his own grave. They were just waiting for him to drop dead from heat stroke so they could finish the job. At 30 feet down, the earth changed. The soil felt damp, but Paton froze. He knew the science of coral islands. If he struck water, it would likely be salt water from the ocean. If he offered the chief salt water, they would kill him for lying. He had one chance. He scooped up the muddy liquid. His heart was pounding. If it was salty, he was a dead man. He touched it to his tongue and froze. It wasn't salt. It was sweet, cold, fresh water. Paton shouted up to the surface, "Rain! Rain from the earth!" The chief didn't believe him. He lowered a clay jug on a rope, expecting to pull up mud and seawater. When the jug came up, the tribe went silent. It wasn't mud. It was crystal clear. In a land dying of thirst, Paton had pulled liquid silver out of a rock. The chief tasted it and shook with fear. He looked at Paton and said, "No man has ever done this. Your God is powerful. He allows rain to come from the earth." In that moment, the entire spiritual worldview of the tribe cracked open. Paton thought he had won, but he made a mistake. He humiliated the island's sorcerers. They didn't see a miracle. They saw a threat to their power, and they decided the only way to stop the water was to burn the man who found it. It happened a few weeks later. The sorcerers gathered an army. Hundreds of warriors surrounded the mission house with torches. They weren't hiding this time. They were chanting for blood. They were going to burn the house down with Paton inside. Paton locked the door and knelt down. He didn't load his musket. He knew he couldn't fight an army. He opened his Bible and prayed the prayer of a dying man. He expected the roof to catch fire at any second, but the fire never touched the roof. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. The shouting died. Outside, the warriors froze. They lowered their clubs. They weren't looking at Paton. They were looking at something standing over the house. Terror swept through the mob. Grown men, warriors who had killed and eaten their enemies without blinking, turned and ran screaming into the jungle. Within a minute, the clearing was empty. Paton stepped out at sunrise, expecting to see ashes. Instead, he saw abandoned weapons and burnt-out torches. He had no idea what had happened. He thought maybe the chief had called them off. It wasn't until a year later that he got the answer. A year later, the chief finally brought it up. He sat Paton down and asked a question that had been eating at him. "Who were the army of men guarding your house that night?" Paton was confused. He said, "Chief, there was no army. I was alone. I was on my knees praying." The chief shook his head violently. He said, "No, we saw them." The chief told him, "We saw hundreds of men. They were not islanders. They were tall. They were wearing garments that shone like the sun. They circled your house so tightly that we could not pass." And the chief added one more detail that made the blood drain from Paton's face. He said, "They all held drawn swords in their hands. We tried to throw our torches, but our arms would not move. We ran because we knew we could not fight light." Paton realized then that he had never been alone. When he was digging the grave, when he was dying of thirst, when the torches were lit, God didn't just give him water. He sent the infantry. It didn't happen overnight, but the water miracle broke the dam. One afternoon, the chief called the tribe together. He didn't ask for a feast. He asked for a shovel. He took his war club, the weapon that had killed so many, and buried it deep in the earth. He said, "We will fight no more." Within a few years, the entire island of Vanuatu turned to Christ. The feasts stopped. The fear vanished. The graveyard of the Pacific became a lighthouse. Paton didn't leave. He grew old right there, sitting on the same logs where they once plotted to kill him. The men who wanted to eat him became his deacons, his friends, and his brothers. Back in Scotland, they called him a madman. They said he was throwing his life away to the worms. But John Paton proved that the safest place in the world isn't in a fortress. It's in the center of God's will. He left a nobody. He returned a legend. And the island that tasted death finally tasted the living water. Paton faced cannibals and won. But Adoniram Judson faced something worse, the death prison of Burma. Hung upside down for 17 months, his only hope was a pillow hidden by his wife. Like this video and click the subscribe button if you want to see the nightmare he endured.